just taking off and just flying.
Do something different.
It was a major breakthrough for African-American entertainers to be on MTV because it was solely for rock artists.
I've been working in the studio since I was 12.
Pleasure.
Hello,
darling.
How are you?
Pleasure to see you.
I make too much money to ever smoke.
You guys are like Burns and Allen.
Wait, hold up. Why you gonna call my mama right?
Getting through it was the clincher for me. It just...
Yeah, I remember that. I couldn't get on.
My mom took me in the studio, and I've been working professionally since I was 12 years old. You know, and I didn't want to. I had made up my mind.
Shame, shame, shame. Shame on you. Yeah,
Some voices don't belong to a generation. They belong to history. The moment Whitney Houston sang, people stopped what they were doing. They listened, and for good reason.
I've been working in the studio since I was 12. My mom took me in the studio, and I've been working professionally since I was 12 years old.
Because Whitney wasn't simply talented. She was extraordinary. The kind of voice that appears once in a lifetime, maybe once in a century. A voice so powerful, so effortless, so unmistakable, that it seemed almost impossible. And because of that, everybody wanted a piece of her.
Well, I heard from NBC, your mom's got a talk show offer. She's a riot. You guys are like Burns and Allen.
Hold up. Why you gonna call my mama right?
Her family needed her. Her church needed her. Her record label needed her. The media needed her. The audience needed her. The world needed Whitney Houston. For decades, she gave people exactly what they wanted. Hit records, sold-out arenas, unforgettable performances, a voice that became the soundtrack to millions of lives. But behind the applause, behind the headlines, behind one of the greatest careers in music history, was a woman carrying expectations she never asked for, a woman constantly performing, constantly giving, constantly becoming whatever everyone else needed her to be. Daughter, superstar, role model, wife, mother, icon, legend, everything except herself.
First of all, let's get one thing straight. Crack is cheap. I make too much money to ever smoke crack.
And after decades of giving the world everything she had, one question still lingers. Did anybody ever truly see Whitney Houston? Not the celebrity, not the voice, not the image, the woman. Because while millions claim to love Whitney, very few seem to ask what Whitney needed in return.
Undescribable feeling, you know, it's like a surge of energy. It's like just taking off and just flying.
This is a story of Whitney Houston, the voice they borrowed. To understand what happened to Whitney Houston, we have to go back to where it all began. Before the awards, before fame, before the pressure. Back to Newark, New Jersey, where a little girl walked into church and sang like the building was on fire. Before the world knew her as Whitney Houston, before the records, before the sold-out arenas, before she became one of the most famous women on earth. She was simply a little girl growing up in Newark, New Jersey.
Hello, how are you? Pleasure.
Hello,
darling.
How are you?
Pleasure to see you.
From the very beginning, music wasn't just part of her life. It was everywhere. It filled the house, filled the church, filled family gatherings, filled every corner of the world around her.
Getting through it was the clincher for me. It just made me feel triumphant in a way, like I had the victory.
Whitney was born into musical royalty. Her mother, Cissy Houston, was one of the most respected gospel singers in America. Her cousin was Dionne Warwick. Family friends included some of the biggest names in music. Legends moved through her world like ordinary people. But with that gift came something else. Expectations. Enormous expectations.
She could depend on me, and that I had to make sure that she was raised properly because that's how I was raised.
Because when everyone around you already knows greatness, greatness stops feeling special. It becomes a standard, the thing you're expected to become. Long before Whitney ever stepped onto a major stage, people were already telling her who she could be, and perhaps more importantly, who she should be.
How bad did it get with the drugs?
We were lacing our marijuana with Bass.
with bass.
Yeah.
You were freebasing cocaine.
Basically.
Yeah.
The church became her first audience, but it also became her first responsibility. Every Sunday, music wasn't simply performance. It was service, a calling, an obligation.
I didn't want to. I had made up my mind that I had lived the life of fame and fortune, and
Whitney learned early that her voice could move people, make them cry, make them pray, make them feel something larger than themselves. And while most children were discovering who they were, Whitney was discovering what she could do for other people. The gift was extraordinary, but gifts come with expectations, especially gifts this rare.
something, one song or something or some time where you hear something, you go, oh, that I can get strength from.
Friends and family would later describe moments when Whitney sang as a teenager and entire rooms fell silent. Not because she was loud, because she was undeniable. There was a power in her voice that seemed impossible to explain. Something natural, something effortless, as though she had been born understanding music in a way the rest of the world never could.
Elements that make up a great pop song for me was the melody and the lyric content.
Yet outside the church, Newark was teaching Whitney different lessons. This wasn't the glamorous America shown on television. It was a city carrying economic hardship, racial tension, and uncertainty. A city where survival often mattered more than dreams.
Whether it be about love strong or love weak, love in between, it talks about the ups and downs and experiences of love, basically.
Whitney stood between two worlds, the discipline of the church and the reality of the streets outside, the polished future her family envisioned, and the ordinary life she sometimes seemed to crave. She watched her cousin Dionne Warwick become a global star. She watched what success looked like, the interviews, the appearances, the expectations, the pressure, and somewhere along the way, Whitney began understanding something many young performers never realized until much later.
Years old. And I said, I want to be a singer. She said, you want to be a singer? You really do? I said, yeah, I really do. So she said, okay, let's go.
Success doesn't just change your life. It changes what people expect from you. And once the world sees greatness in you, it rarely lets you be anything else. By her late teens, Whitney Houston wasn't simply talented. She was becoming impossible to ignore. Modeling opportunities appeared. Industry executives took notice. Musicians talked about her. Doors began opening, one by one, slowly at first, then all at once. And standing just beyond those doors was a music industry waiting to transform Whitney Houston into a star. The question was, what version of Whitney they wanted, and what parts of herself she would have to leave behind to become it.
Love gone bad, love gone good, love indifferent. It's just, it's got a melody and a song, a story to tell.
In 1983, Whitney Houston was just 19 years old, beautiful, talented, unknown, standing on the edge of a future nobody could fully imagine. Then she met the man who would change her life forever, Clive Davis, one of the most powerful executives in the music business, a man with a reputation for spotting greatness before anyone else could see it.
I remember that it was a major breakthrough for African American entertainers to be on MTV because it was solely for rock artists.
The moment he heard Whitney sing, he knew this wasn't another promising young artist. This was a phenomenon waiting to happen. And together, they began creating what would become one of the most successful careers in music history.
I have nothing to prove. I give myself, and that's it. That's all I have to give.
But success rarely arrives without compromise, especially in the music industry. Because while Clive Davis recognized Whitney's extraordinary talent, he also recognized something else, her commercial potential, the ability to sell records not just to one audience, but to everyone. Black audiences, white audiences, pop audiences, adult contemporary audiences, international audiences, everybody. It was a strategy that would make Whitney Houston a global superstar.
I remember Michael Jackson making a very big breakthrough, and then Tina Turner, along with myself and Bobby Brown and a few others that were major breakthrough artists on MTV. But
it would also create one of the deepest tensions of her career, because the Whitney being presented to the world wasn't always the Whitney her friends and family knew. The public saw elegance, grace, sophistication, perfection, a polished image carefully crafted for mainstream America. But beneath the designer dresses and magazine covers was a young woman from Newark. Funny, loud, playful, sharp-tongued, full of personality. A woman who didn't always fit the image being sold.
But I do remember the hassle of introducing black artists to MTV because, let's face it, was solely for white artists at that point.
The machine kept moving, hit after hit, record after record. Success arrived faster than anyone expected. Her debut album became a phenomenon. Then another, then another. Suddenly, Whitney Houston wasn't simply famous. She was becoming untouchable.
It's not all it's cracked up to be. It ain't all the glamour and all that stuff. It's hard work. It's a lot of work. But when you love it, it feels good.
The biggest female recording artist in the world. But with crossover success came criticism, especially from parts of the black community. Some accuse her music of being too safe, too polished, too carefully designed for white audiences. The criticism hurt deeply because Whitney knew exactly where she came from. She knew her roots. She knew her culture. She knew her family.
Well, you know, I've always had this thing about, why does it always have to be a breaking ground for people who are just totally gifted and talented?
Yet increasingly, she found herself trapped between competing expectations. Too black for some audiences, not black enough for others. Too polished, too commercial, too perfect, too successful. Everyone seemed to have an opinion about who Whitney Houston should be, and almost nobody was asking who she actually was.
African Americans and other artists, who are Caucasian Americans, why should there be a breakthrough on MTV? I didn't get it.
The pressure only intensified as her fame exploded. Television appearances, award shows, endless interviews, constant scrutiny. Every smile became public property. Every decision became a headline. Every version of Whitney became something to debate. And perhaps the cruelest part was that she was still barely out of her teens, learning who she was while the entire world watched, performing a version of herself that millions adored.
My face being shown all the time certainly doesn't hurt at all.
Yet somewhere beneath the image, beneath the perfection, beneath the voice that captivated the world, the real Whitney was becoming harder and harder to find. Because once people fall in love with an image, they rarely want to see the person behind it. And soon, Whitney would meet someone who saw a completely different version of her. A version the cameras almost never captured. A version that finally felt free.
You have to be outstanding to break down the walls. And Michael and a few others are outstanding. So, it was cool. It's very cool.
By the late 1980s, Whitney Houston had become everything the world wanted her to be. A superstar, a role model, America's sweetheart, the perfect voice, the perfect image, the perfect star. There was only one problem. Nobody is perfect. Not really. And maintaining perfection is exhausting, especially when the version of yourself the world loves isn't entirely the person you feel like inside.
The growth and the progress of what this music television station was going to do, and everyone knew it was going to be huge and large and in charge.
For years, Whitney had lived under extraordinary expectations. Every performance had to be flawless. Every interview had to be polished. Every public appearance had to reinforce the image. Elegant, graceful, controlled, untouchable. But behind closed doors, Whitney was something else entirely.
And the modeling business really never knew that I did sing. So when they found out that I did sing, it was like, oh, so besides that, you can sing, so let's deal with that too,
She was funny, loud, mischievous, competitive, quick-witted. She loved to laugh, loved to joke, loved to be around people who treated her like a normal person. Not a legend, not a brand, not a product, just Whitney.
So what we had to do was watch the format to see if we could fit in or see if we could break it. So we did both, basically.
Then she met Bobby Brown, and suddenly there was someone who seemed completely uninterested in the image everyone else was protecting. Bobby wasn't intimidated by her fame. He wasn't impressed by her success. He didn't treat her like royalty. He treated her like a person. And for Whitney, That felt liberating.
Oh, yeah, wake me up before you go. Sure, I do.
Their relationship confused many people from the beginning. On paper, they seemed like opposites. Whitney represented sophistication and control. Bobby represented unpredictability and rebellion. Yet the reality was far more complicated.
I don't really know how I really would describe myself as a singer. I just sing, you know. That's what I do. I just sing.
Because Bobby wasn't an escape from Whitney's real self. In many ways, he gave her permission to be it. Around Bobby, Whitney didn't have to be perfect. She didn't have to perform. She didn't have to carry the expectations of an entire industry. She could be loud. She could be messy. She could be human. Friends who knew them often described a side of Whitney the public rarely saw. The side that laughed harder, talked louder, relaxed more, the Newark girl beneath the superstar. But while Whitney may have felt free, the media saw something entirely different. Almost immediately, their relationship became a spectacle. Headlines painted Bobby as a bad influence, a troublemaker, the man dragging America's sweetheart down. Television hosts mocked him. Tabloids attacked him. Public opinion turned against him. And with every controversy, the narrative became stronger. Bobby Brown was a problem. Bobby Brown was a downfall. Bobby Brown was ruining Whitney Houston. It was a story the media loved. Simple, easy, convenient. But real life is rarely that simple. Because hidden beneath the headlines were deeper questions nobody seemed interested in asking. Questions about race. Questions about class. Questions about respectability. Questions about who society believed Whitney Houston should be. Many critics weren't simply uncomfortable with Bobby Brown. They were uncomfortable with a version of Whitney that appeared around him. Less polished, less controlled, less perfect, more real. And perhaps that was the greatest threat of all. Because the world had fallen in love with an image. But Bobby knew the woman underneath it. The problem was, the pressure surrounding Whitney Houston never disappeared. If anything, it became heavier. The fame grew larger. The expectations grew higher. The scrutiny became relentless. And eventually, even the strongest relationships can struggle under that weight. Because while the world was busy judging Whitney Houston's marriage, something far more dangerous was happening. The pressure she had carried since childhood was finally beginning to crack. And the cost would be devastating. There are some burdens so heavy, people stop asking how you're carrying them. They simply assume you always will. By the late 1990s, Whitney Houston had spent nearly 2 decades living under a spotlight that never turned off. Every performance was expected to be extraordinary. Every appearance was expected to be flawless. Every note was expected to remind the world why she was Whitney Houston. The voice, the legend, the standard. And perhaps that's what made the pressure so dangerous. Because legends aren't allowed to struggle, at least not publicly. The world celebrates greatness, but it rarely understands the cost of maintaining it. For Whitney, that cost had been accumulating for years. The pressure to perform, the pressure to remain perfect, the pressure to satisfy an industry built around her success, the pressure to protect an image that often felt impossible to live inside. And eventually, something had to give. What followed would become one of the most misunderstood chapters of Whitney Houston's life. Addiction. For years, the public treated addiction as evidence of weakness, a failure, a personal flaw. But addiction rarely begins as self-destruction. More often, it begins as escape. Escape from pain. Escape from pressure. Escape from expectations that never stop. And by this point, Whitney was carrying more expectations than almost anyone in entertainment. She wasn't simply responsible for herself anymore. She was responsible for a global brand, a family, a marriage, a career, a legacy. Millions of people expected Whitney Houston to keep being Whitney Houston forever. But human beings aren't designed to live that way. Behind the scenes, concern was growing. Friends noticed changes. Industry insiders noticed changes. Audiences noticed changes. Yet despite the warning signs, the machine kept moving. Tours continued. Projects continued. Interviews continued. Because that's often how celebrities work. As long as the person can still perform, people convince themselves everything is fine. Then came 2002, and one interview that would define public perception for years. Whitney Houston sitting across from journalist Diane Sawyer. Millions watched, hoping for answers, hoping for explanations, hoping to finally understand what was happening. The interview quickly became famous. Headlines focused on controversy, sound bites, memes, tabloid moments. But looking back today, something else becomes visible. Exhaustion, defensiveness, pain. A woman trying desperately to protect pieces of herself while the entire world demanded access. The public saw celebrity under scrutiny. What they may have been witnessing was someone crying for help in the only language she still felt safe speaking. And perhaps the most heartbreaking part of all was how many people were benefiting from Whitney Houston while she was clearly struggling. Record labels, television networks, tabloids, managers, entire industries built around access to her life. Some looked away, some are enabled, some profited. Few seem capable of stopping the cycle. Because Whitney Houston wasn't just a person anymore. She was an institution, and institutions rarely slow down for human suffering. Meanwhile, another life was unfolding beside her. Her daughter, Bobby Christina, the person Whitney loved most in the world, the person she desperately wanted to protect. Yet children often inherit more than names. They inherit environments, pressures, patterns, wounds. And as Whitney struggled beneath the weight she had carried for years, there were growing fears that history might be preparing to repeat itself. Because the tragedy surrounding Whitney Houston wasn't approaching its end. It was approaching its most devastating chapter. And soon, the world would be forced to confront a question it had avoided for far too long. Had we spent so much time loving Whitney Houston's voice that we forgot to care for the woman herself? On February 11, 2012, the world lost Whitney Houston. She was 48 years old, found unresponsive in a bathtub inside the Beverly Hilton Hotel, just hours before music's biggest night, the Grammy Awards, a celebration of an industry she had helped define, an industry that, in many ways, had never quite known what to do with her. The news spread instantly. Phones lit up. Television networks interrupted programming. Radio stations changed playlists. Fans gathered outside the hotel in disbelief, because for millions of people, Whitney Houston didn't feel mortal. She felt permanent, like her voice would simply always exist, always fill the room, always rise above the noise. Yet suddenly, the voice was gone, and what remained was a question nobody wanted to ask. How did we get here? Because Whitney's death didn't happen in a single night. It happened over years. Years of pressure, years of expectation, years of public scrutiny, years of people needing something from her. The comeback attempts, the interviews, the performances, the promises that things were getting better. All of it carried the same unspoken hope, that Whitney Houston could somehow become the version of herself everyone remembered, the version frozen in time, the flawless voice, the perfect star, the icon. But people are not memories. They are human beings. They age, they struggle, they change, they carry scars. And by the final years of her life, Whitney was carrying more than most people could see. The tragedy is not that Whitney Houston wasn't loved. She was loved by millions. The tragedy is that love and understanding are not always the same thing. Because while the world adored Whitney Houston, many people struggled to understand what it felt like to be Whitney Houston, to carry a gift that defined every room you entered, to live beneath impossible expectations, to spend decades being introduced as a legend before anyone ever asked how you were doing. Then came another heartbreak. 3 years later, Whitney's daughter, Bobby Christina Brown, was found unresponsive in a bathtub under hauntingly similar circumstances. She would later pass away at just 22 years old. For many people, it felt impossible to comprehend. A tragedy repeating itself. A wound reopening before it had ever healed. A mother and daughter connected by love, and ultimately by loss. And suddenly, Whitney's story became larger than a celebrity biography. It became a cautionary tale. About fame. About pressure. About the hidden cost of being needed by everyone. Yet despite everything, despite the headlines, despite the scandals, despite the pain, Whitney Houston's voice endured. It still does. Play one of her songs today, and people stop talking. They listen, just like they always did, Because greatness like haze doesn't disappear. It echoes across generations, across decades, across lives she never even knew she touched. But perhaps the most important question isn't what Whitney gave the world. We know what she gave us: the records, the performances, the memories, the soundtrack to countless lives. The real question is what the world gave back to her. Because this story was never really about a voice. It was about a woman, a daughter, a wife, a mother, a friend, a human being who spent her life carrying a gift that belonged to everyone else. And maybe that's why Whitney Houston's story still hurts. Not because we lost a superstar, but because somewhere beneath the fame, beneath the image, beneath one of the greatest voices ever recorded, was a woman simply trying to be loved for who she was. Not for what she could give, not for what she could sing, just Whitney. And maybe that's a question her story leaves behind. Did we love Whitney Houston? Or did we simply borrow her voice? The world remembers the records, the awards, the performances, the impossible notes. But behind every legendary voice, there is a person. And behind Whitney Houston's voice was a woman who spent her life giving pieces of herself away. To family, to fans, to the industry, to history. The music will live forever. The voice will never truly disappear. But perhaps Whitney Houston's greatest legacy isn't perfection. It's humanity, a reminder that even the brightest stars carry burdens we cannot see. And that sometimes the people who give us the most are the ones who need the most in return. This was Whitney Houston, the voice they borrowed,